Fernando wrote in, what would happen if we extended human lifespans to 500 years or even 1,000? Well, we spoke to Aubrey de Grey about this earlier in the week, and there's a lot of frantic hyperbole about what would happen if we extended human lifespans. And then there's also more sort of calm voices. I think Aubrey de Grey would be one. I still believe the risk aversion that we talked about with Aubrey de Grey is an issue, but not as big of an issue as it's sometimes made out to be. Because, as an example, if you're 30 versus 70, driving in a car has a certain amount of risk, right? You're more likely to die driving in a car than you are getting on a commercial plane. I don't know people whose willingness to get in a car based on the probability of being in a car accident is different when they're 30 or when they're 70. Now, you could say, well, David, that's because even though it's way more likely that you would die in a car accident than on a plane, it's still on any given car ride very unlikely statistically that you would get killed. So it's not a very good example. But I think when you apply it to most areas of life, I don't observe people being drastically different in terms of their risk aversion when they're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, unless significant changes have taken place to their life circumstances. So maybe a 500-year lifespan would sort of become the norm and it wouldn't affect risk aversion.
So that's interesting because I remember George H.W. Bush will skydive on these monumentous birthdays. Like I think he did it at 80, 85, 90 even.
Maybe.
And would he be willing to do that if he was expected to live another 400 years? Maybe so, but maybe not. I mean, skydiving's not too incredibly risky or anything, but
I actually don't know how
like
safe it is.
Yeah.
It seems dangerous, but you don't really hear too often about people dying doing it, although maybe you don't hear about it often because it's so dangerous that it's sort of expected. Like, yeah, people are going to die doing it. It's not that weird. The one thing I do think would require a sort of reframing for people would be careers and finances. If one could live 500 years, instead of maybe having, for the average person working for a significant period of time in 2, maybe 3 fields during their life, maybe it would be much more common that you go through 8 or 10 very different fields. You go back to college when you're 100 and you go back again when you're 200 and you sort of start over and go into a drastically different field. And that relates to economics as well, because when you think now about the power of compound interest and how much savings early, which will translate to in dollars available at retirement, if you're talking about a couple hundred years in accrued cumulative interest, every $10 you spend now has a much greater impact later in life.
Yeah, you would not be able to retire at the age of 62 anymore, that's for sure. I was thinking about that one too because, I have no interest in becoming, say, a lawyer or a doctor, what have you. I don't think anyone wants me performing surgeries on them. I think that's fair to say.
Not as an unlicensed doctor anyway.
No. But if I was to live another few hundred years, I think I would definitely go back to school and become much more well-rounded, have all these different careers under my belt.
I think so. Of course, in 200 years, it would cost $350,000 a year to go to Pat's alma mater of Suffolk University. So that would probably be a financial consideration as well.
Yes.
I think those are some of the major shifts that would take place if human lifespans were drastically extended. And also, I think willingness to go through certain medical procedures would change, right? Because if you have a procedure that you evaluate at age 60 based on how many years you're likely to live and how intense the recovery would be and how much benefit you would get from it, your calculation might be different if you expect to live 90 years versus if you expect to live 200 years in terms of what medical procedures you might tolerate.
Are you talking about like something like a knee transplant,
Sure.
a knee replacement,
Maybe.
or something like a heart transplant?
Either.
There's a big span in that.
Whatever. I think it would just, for all medical considerations, it would be a factor. Life expectancy being so drastically different would be a factor in terms of thinking about what procedures do you want, which procedures are worth it financially, which in the U.S. is a consideration.